Well, welcome to the arms race lecture. I'm this second attempt. Going to try and run this. When we get to, there's a couple of videos which I will do some commentary through. Can't actually allow the audio to go because it's copyrighted and YouTube won't allow me to publish that. So that's what those two videos are about. I'll do some commentary as we look at the pictures so that you can see what's going on. Anyway, so let's get started. We're talking about the Cold War, and the arms race seems to be the quintessential or the big thing that everybody remembers about the Cold War, and that is we were scared to death of this nuclear menace. So remember that World War II ended 1945 when we dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so that sort of started it. Of course, the Soviets were, by that time, we were already arguing over Europe. And so the Soviets were not happy that we had this weapon and they didn't. And remember that they got the bomb about 1948 or 1949. So that was the beginning of it. So they developed the bomb, but they also, actually used espionage and stole some of the secrets. So they were able to catch up fairly quickly to the United States. And now we have a nuclear arms race. In 1951, Truman was the president, and he established a thing called the Civil Defense Administration. And this was all about radioactivity and dealing with nuclear bombs and that kind of stuff. And nobody really was too worried about it this time. World War II had just ended. We were more worried about Korea, actually. And there was no nuclear threat there. The Koreans didn't have nuclear weapons. But we were worried about it enough to say, hey, we need to do something about this. So Truman, one of the last things that he did before he leaves the presidency is he creates the Civil Defense Administration. Like it says, nobody really paid too much attention to it. In 1952, we test our first hydrogen bomb. Now, a hydrogen bomb uses a different technology than an atom bomb. They're both nuclear, but the atom bomb uses fission, whereas the hydrogen bomb uses fusion. And to give you an idea of what that's like, the sun, which is 93 million miles away, uses fusion to create the heat and the light that you experience from the sun. So that's the technology that's going on inside of a hydrogen bomb. And you can see it's much more powerful than a fusion bomb, than a fission bomb, one that actually explodes the atoms. So that's what's going on. Remember the damage that we saw from the Hiroshima bombing at the end of World War II. Multiply that times 500 times. It's hard to imagine. Remember that the bomb blast destroyed the city probably for a 5-mile diameter. That was 500 times more powerful than that. We're talking unimaginable. It's hard to even grasp how big these explosions would be or could be. And we didn't have just one. We had lots of them. And we kept making them. Of course, the Soviet Union's not just going to sit there and let us have a more powerful weapon. And so the next year they tried their hydrogen bomb, and lo and behold, it worked. So from 1954 to 1958, the United States conducted 19 different hydrogen bomb tests. And they chose a place called the Bikini Islands. It's out in the middle of the Pacific, way away from everything, except for the people that lived on the Bikini Islands. Now, we did have to come in, and we politely sort of said, you are going to move. We asked them, quote unquote, asked them, would you move? And of course, they agreed. At least that's what the American propaganda films told us. But anyways, we moved them off those islands, and we used those islands for testing of these bombs. So lots of them, and they have some pretty. Everyone was given a name. This one's Dakota and was done in 1956. And they took pictures and did all kinds of bomb blast tests. They checked for radiation. They weren't really sure how these hydrogen bombs, how much fuel do you need to add and how big of an explosion is that going to produce. The Army actually did one hydrogen bomb test that actually took one of the Bikini Islands and just totally, it's gone. It's now underwater. It took that much of the land mass out of the island so that it's now underwater. And they go, oops, we didn't think it was going to do that. So it's sort of, I don't know, it's just sort of interesting that this massive, powerful technology and how little we knew and how, it just seems reckless. But back then, times were different, and people didn't think too much about it. They just thought, oh, another bomb went off in the Pacific, and everything's working good, and we're trying to scare the Soviets, and probably worked, just like they were scaring us. This one's Operation Hardtack. You can see that's 1958. So this is all happening while Eisenhower is president. All right, so in 1954, we announced a new policy, right? So remember the Truman Doctrine was, we'll help fight communism anywhere, anytime. And we also had a policy of containment. That was the Keenan Doctrine that he helped the president put that policy together of containment and the Truman Doctrine. All right, so long ago, 1954, now Eisenhower is the president. This guy, Foster Dulles, was the Secretary of State, and he announced a policy of massive retaliation. The goal was, and you can see here a little cartoon of Nikita Khrushchev and Eisenhower sitting on the warhead of a nuclear bomb. The idea was to get as close as you could to war without going to war. In other words, you have to threaten people. They have to actually believe you're crazy enough to use nuclear weapons. Otherwise, if you won't use them, it doesn't matter if you have them. And so that's this policy of brinkmanship to actually get people to believe that you're going to go to war if they do something. They have to believe that. And so you see, if it does, now here's the problem. What if you make a mistake and you go over the line and you actually do go to war? Then you got a problem. So the goal was to get as close as possible to war without going to war. Threaten, have these big weapons, and pretend. Hopefully they were pretending. Everybody hoped they were pretending that they really wouldn't do this. All right, so that's brinkmanship. Massive retaliation basically says that whoever dies, well, we'll get there in a second, but whoever launches their missiles first, we see them coming, and then we launch our missiles. Well, theirs are going to land first, so we die, but then ours are already on the way. They're going to land second, and then they'll die, and everybody dies. That's massive retaliation. All right. There's another thing that happened in America at this time was the creation of what we call interstate highways, and you can see those on the map there. These are the blue roads. These are interstate, where's the closest interstate we have to the school or to your house is Interstate 5, and you can see that. It's actually a blue line that goes up from San Diego through Los Angeles, through Sacramento, into Oregon, and on up into Seattle. That's Interstate 5. The next one over, you'll notice, comes through San Diego, up through San Bernardino, and then heads out towards southern Nevada, where Las Vegas is. And then it goes up through Utah to Salt Lake City, and on up through Idaho and Montana. That is Interstate 15. If you go out to Corona, you can catch Interstate 15, and it will take you north or south. All right, so if you might have noticed the pattern there, so we have Interstate 5, then we have Interstate 15, If you went over to New Mexico and Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, you will see another north-south interstate. That's actually Interstate 25. So anybody pick up the pattern? 5, 15, 25. Then we'll get over towards the east, well, the middle of America, and that's where the 45, the 65, and the last one on the East Coast, the one that goes up the East Coast from Florida all the way up to Maine, is the 95. So all north-south interstates they go by the numbers 5, 15, 25, 45, 95, and they go in order from the West Coast to the East Coast. So you can always tell which way you're headed, which way the road you're on is going to take you, and where you are in the United States just by the number on the interstate. They also did the east-west interstates the same way. So the ones at the very bottom of the United States, the one that goes through Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, into Texas, and then across over to Florida is the 10, right? And so it goes the same way, except for there's no 5s. It's all even numbers. So there's the 10, there's the 20, there's the 40, and the 70, and the 80, and the 90. The 90 runs across the northern part of the United States. So this whole interstate system, while we love them to drive our cars on them, they make it easy to get around the United States, wasn't designed for cars. It wasn't designed for trucks. It was designed for missiles to be able to be pulled around different places in the United States. And so the federal government put massive amounts of money into building this interstate system to move missiles, not to actually help us with our cars. Although, you know, I don't think they've ever been used for missiles. They get used for cars all the time. Anyway, so that's how that started. So in 1957, the Soviet Union launched their first ICBM. ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missiles. And so now they can shoot a nuclear warhead, that's a bomb, and it doesn't need to go in an airplane. Now it's just a missile. A missile is basically a huge fuel tank with a rocket engine, and the warhead is right up in the tip of those ICBMs. So now we can deliver these nuclear warheads across the planet in much faster time. Missiles fly 3-4 times as fast as an airplane does. It doesn't require people. It doesn't have to return. So it expands the nuclear capabilities of both sides when we develop ICBMs. All right, so I've turned the volume down on that. That's good. All right, so they launched their first one in 1957. In 1957, they also did another thing that really got our attention. The United States, that is. They launched a satellite. The first satellite launched into space was done by the Soviet Union, and it was called Sputnik. And you can see a picture of it here. It's hard to get an idea of the size. It's basically a big polished aluminum ball. It's probably about 4 feet in diameter, and then it has big, long antennas that come off of it. And that's kind of what it looked like. They launched that into space. They were ahead of us with the space race, and so we were a little jealous, and they were able to kind of rub our noses in it and say, ha ha, we did this first, and that caused some problems. First of all, it scared us. The fact that the Soviet Union could launch something that was so high up in the air that we couldn't shoot it down, and we couldn't, well, we could see it with the naked eye, but it was miles up into space. And how did we know it was there? Well, if it was a really clear night and the moon was bright enough, you might be able to see it going across in the sky. But more than that, there was a little radio transmitter in it. So that's all it did. It had no cameras, had no weapons, had no ability, couldn't steer it. All it did was had a little radio, and it sent out a beep. And you could hear that if you turned your radio in. When it came overhead, you could hear the beeping. And it scared us, the fact that our enemy could put something up in the sky right over our heads, and we couldn't do anything about it. And so we decided, you know what, we're going to have to go into space, and we're going to have to start doing this as well. So one of the things we decided is, you know what, we need to have scientists and people that are able to do this stuff. And so they put a lot of money into education. It's called the National Defense Education Act. And a lot like what we're doing today with the STEM or STEAM, science, technology, and education. So we're still doing this, trying to keep up with other countries that are pushing ahead in science and math and all of those fields. So we did it in 1958, put more money because we needed smarter students that were going to be able to come out and build rockets and go into space. And so that actually changed education quite a bit. So I'm sure that's not what anybody thought about with the satellite. We'll launch this satellite and the Americans will get a better education system. But there's always unintended consequences. So it actually changed education. And the country continues to respond in that sort of way. One thing we did do is we built a plane. We were, Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, those aircraft corporations were all into the Cold War. They were building weapons and planes to do what the government wanted to do. So this is a U-2. I realize you may have thought that was just a rock group, but nope, it's a plane, and they got their name from this plane. So you can't tell from the scale, but it's meant to fly somewhere between 80 and 100,000 feet above the ground. And if you know about the atmosphere of the Earth, the higher you go, the less dense the atmosphere is. And the atmosphere is actually what holds a plane up in the air. As wind goes over the wings, it creates lift. That lift pulls the plane up. The problem is that the higher you get, the less dense air going over the wing creates less and less lift. So most planes have what they call a ceiling. So they can't go much higher than they're designed to fly. And you can try to go higher, but you lose control of the airplane and then it comes back down again. So this plane had massive, massive wings, and it's hard to tell from the picture, but these are huge. And the plane itself was basically empty. There was nothing in there. There was a fuel tank and a jet engine, and that was it. There were no weapons. The only thing there was in the nose cone, there was a high-definition camera to take pictures. And this plane could fly so high, we believe, that the Soviets couldn't shoot it down, let alone see it. They might have been able to pick it up on radar, but pretty difficult to pick out. And so we felt pretty safe flying these over Russia, over Cuba, any communist nation. We could fly over and take pictures and see what was going on down there. That was the goal, to spy on them. And of course, they accused us of having this plane. And we said, oh, no, we don't have any spy plane, which in 1960 proved to be fairly embarrassing because they actually shot one of them down. That shocked America. It made America look, well, what did it do? We're liars. We're not actually telling the truth. They said we had a spy plane. We kept saying, no, we don't. Anyways, hang on a second. My birds are making too much noise. Not my birds, but the birds outside. Anyway, so that was the way the U-2 plane and the incident went down. It didn't matter that much other than embarrass the United States and made the Soviets feel like they won that episode of the battle of the Cold War. So I was talking about this mutually assured destruction, 1960s. So this is an advance on the massive retaliation policy. This is so if you launch. This basically said if you launch missiles, we will launch our missiles. And then so whoever launches first, of course, they know their bombs are going to hit. We launch our missiles because it was assumed that, of course, the Soviets were going to launch first. We would never do such a thing. Of course, they thought we might do it. And they would never do such a thing. But anyways, whoever launches first, the other people see them coming, they launch their second, and then they pass like this. And the ones who launched first, they land first. This group all dies. And then these missiles land second, and then this group all dies. So it was mutually assured destruction. And that was supposed to scare people, to scare each country into not being first. Because if you know you're going to die, if you know it's going to destroy you and your country, if you push that button, the hope was that you wouldn't push the button. All right? So if you think about it, it's whoever attacks first dies second. And you can see now, by 1960, Kennedy is the president. We'll hear about him a little bit later. But here's Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushchev was the new leader of the Soviet Union after Stalin died. And so that's actually what the cartoon is showing. And you see the trunk is nuclear war, and here's the two leaders trying to hold the lid down so that we don't get into a nuclear war. So this scared Americans, obviously, and fear is not good for a country. It costs money economically. Fear, people stop going to work, they don't plan for the future, they don't save money. Well, maybe they do save money. They save it because they don't know what's going to happen, and so they don't spend it. A lot of people actually built bomb shelters. If they were building houses in the late 50s and early 60s, a lot of people were so worried about this that you could, when you built a house, you just say, hey, build a bomb shelter. And there was all kinds of technology that was being put out there. If you're in a nuclear explosion, this is what your bomb shelter needs to have. It needs to have this food, it needs to have blah, blah, blah. There was a lot of stuff about this is what you need to do, but people were spending money on bomb shelters. And if you go to houses that were built in the late 50s and early 60s, every once in a while, you can still find a house that, oh yeah, there's the bomb shelter, and they're still there. The government wanted people to feel safe, and so what they did was they created, I'm going to call it propaganda. It was information to help them feel like, okay, how do you survive a nuclear blast? Well, you go, nobody survives a nuclear blast. That's not true. It's just you have to be far enough away from it. So actually the duck and cover drills, like we do earthquake drills and that kind of stuff, they actually do lessen the amount of destruction and death. Now, how much depends on where you are, right? If we have an earthquake right under us and the building falls down, actually being under our desk probably isn't going to help much. But if you're 20 miles away from an earthquake and you get under the desk and it's just a light bulb that falls or a ceiling tile falls or something like that, then it does protect you from that earthquake. So the same principles apply to nuclear bombs. So these duck and cover drills, while they weren't going to save you if you were too close to the blast, they could protect you if you were far enough away from the blast. And basically what they wanted people to know and understand is, yes, there is something dangerous out there, but there are things you can do that will protect you. And if you feel like you have hope that you can protect yourself, then you feel better about going about your life and doing the best you can do, which is what the government wanted people to do. And we're going to watch a little video, and again, I've had to turn the sound off because, this may get too boring, I may just go to the next slide, but we'll see how it goes. But anyways, I watched this video. It wasn't a video, it was a film. We didn't have video back in those days. But I watched this film when I was in the 2nd and 3rd grade. And I remember it very well. It was one of those cartoons. And we saw it every year in school to get us ready. It was called Duck and Cover. And so this was a little turtle. His name was Bert. And the idea was children learned that turtles protect themselves by ducking and covering. And so when there's, like you see, here's the explosion where Bert goes, oh no, this is dangerous, and he goes, and he's protected. And so that was the theory that behind this cartoon. So This was shown. I'm going to let the video go. I'm not going to watch this whole thing because it's kind of, you can probably find this on YouTube. Just put in duck and cover, and you can probably, the video is probably about 6 or 7 minutes long. So anyways, so you can see it was an official civil defense film produced by the government and the National Education Association. So the government and schools were working together to make this information so that children didn't, freak out or live in the fear that they have now. I'm going to let this go just a little bit longer so you can see. It was not just a cartoon, but it was partially a cartoon. Now, this is what classrooms looked like back in the 50s, and so they were teaching the children how to duck and cover. Cover the back of your neck and protect your eyes and get away from windows and those kinds of things, because a bomb blast would, try and do that. Now, they also are going to talk about, we're not going to talk, right here we're talking about how we have a fire department to take care of fires. We have a police department to take care of criminals. And we also have a civil defense organization to help us with nuclear bomb blasts. I know it sounds a little absurd, but that's the way it was. Anyways, so that is what was put out there, and they tried to tell you what were the warning signs. You could have one with warning and one without warning. Hopefully we'd see the bombs coming and we would sound a siren and you could go to a safe place and you'd be protected. But you could get one without warning, and the first thing that you would see is a bright flash, and they wanted you to get down right away. So if you got the warning, go to a safe place. If you didn't get the warning, just hit the ground where you are and duck and cover. That's pretty much the video, and trying to make people feel like it was okay. I'm not going to show this one either. It's pretty similar, same thing. All right, and not that one. All right, so that's pretty much it. The end of the arms race lecture. So you get the idea, the feeling, first the push for science and technology and the space race and the building of fear and the one-upmanship and the you better not do this or we'll do that, back and forth. And the world watched and held their breath. And the Soviet Union and the United States made lots of promises and threats. Fortunately, we never carried through. So, hope you enjoyed the lecture. Sorry about the having to keep the sound down.